Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today, we've got a stack of research in front of us that, honestly, it's probably the most challenging material we've tackled in a long, long time.
It's definitely a paradigm shifter.
It is, and I don't mean challenging like it's hard to read or, full of jargon. I mean challenging because it it really goes against the very story we tell ourselves about human progress.
The standard narrative, yeah.
Exactly. We all know that story, right?
Mm.
Ancient humans were superstitious. They lived in this demon-haunted world, as Sagan put it. They made up myths to explain the sunrise because they didn't have physics.
And then slowly we climbed out of the darkness.
We got smarter. We invented logic
Yeah.
and the scientific method, and we traded in all that vague metaphorical stuff for cold, hard, precise facts.
That is the Enlightenment story. It's a very comfortable story, and it's comfortable because it puts us right at the top. We're the smart ones. We're the adults in the room.
Right. The ancients were just children telling stories around a campfire.
But what if that's not just wrong, but completely backward?
And that's the core hypothesis we're getting into today. The research we're looking at argues that those ancient texts, the myths, the early religious writings, they weren't primitive stabs at science.
Not at all.
They were, and this is the term the sources use, high-density cognitive technologies. And we've forgotten how to use them.
The user's manual is lost.
Completely lost. And the real kicker, the part that really got me, is that the research suggests that what we call belief, our modern, almost obsessive need to be right or wrong about a certain doctrine, that's not a sign of progress or clarity. It's a symptom. It's a sign that the original technology broke down.
It's a provocative thesis, to say the least. The argument isn't just that, ideas changed over time. That's obvious. The argument is that the very structure of our cognition shifted.
How we think.
How we think, fundamentally.
Yeah.
We moved from what the sources are calling a holistic symbolic architecture to a dualistic belief system. And in making that jump, yes, we gained a certain kind of categorical precision. We got very good at putting things in boxes.
But we lost something huge.
You lost the ability to process reality as an integrated, interconnected whole.
Okay, categorical precision versus a unified whole.
Yeah.
That sounds really abstract, so let's try to ground this right away. Because my first reaction reading these notes was, skepticism.
Of course.
It feels a little bit like that noble savage idea or some kind of golden age fallacy.
Yeah.
This romantic notion that everyone way back when was wise and deeply connected, and now we're all just fragmented and anxious.
And that's the right question to ask. We have to be really, really careful not to romanticize the ancient world. Life was, for the most part, brutal, violent, and short.
Absolutely.
But the evidence for this cognitive shift, it doesn't come from, how nice people were to each other. It comes from how they structured their narratives, how they built their societies. We're not looking at their morality. We're looking at their mental software.
Okay, so let's get into that software. The outline for our deep dive today calls this first part, myth as high-density technology. When I hear technology, I think of a hammer or a smartphone, an external tool.
Right.
But the argument here is that these stories were internal tools.
Precisely. Think about how we read a myth today. Well, let's take a common one, like the Odyssey.
Okay.
We read it as a fantastic adventure story. This guy, Odysseus, he's just trying to get home. He fights a cyclops. He outsmarts a witch. He battles sea monsters. And eventually he makes it back and, kills all the guys who are trying to steal his wife. It's great entertainment.
A blockbuster movie.
It is. But the working hypothesis in our source material suggests that this is a very thin, very surface reading. To the ancient mind, a myth like the Odyssey was a recursive algorithm.
Recursive? You mean it repeats itself?
It means it functions on multiple levels of reality at the same time, and this is the crucial part. Those levels all mirror each other. It's the concept of isomorphism.
Isomorphism. Same shape.
Same shape. The structure of the cosmos, the structure of the city, and the structure of your own individual psyche were all understood to be fundamentally identical. They had the same blueprint.
So a story about the universe is automatically a story about me.
It has to be. There's no other way to read it in that framework. A story about a king trying to bring order to his kingdom is, by definition, a story about your own consciousness trying to bring order to its own chaotic impulses.
So let's apply that to the Odyssey again, because, I remember high school English class, and we talked about the hero's journey, but that was mostly about plot structure, not cognitive technology.
Okay, let's pick a specific scene. Remember the Lotus Eaters?
Vaguely. Odysseus lands on an island. His men eat some kind of plant.
They eat the lotus fruit, and they immediately lose all desire to go home. They just want to stay there forever in a state of blissful apathy. Odysseus has to physically drag them back to the ships against their will.
Right. So on the surface, it's a kind of just say no to drugs message.
A simple fable. A public service announcement from the Bronze Age. Don't get high or you'll forget your responsibilities.
But structurally.
Structurally, in this holistic framework, that little episode is mapping a very specific and very dangerous cognitive failure mode. It's not just about drugs, it's about the loss of telos.
The ultimate aim or purpose.
Your ultimate aim. The lotus represents the overwhelming seduction of immediate, painless sensory gratification, and it shows how that gratification can completely override your long-term integrative purpose.
Home.
Home is the symbol for the integrated self. So the high-density part of this technology is that the story encodes a psychological protocol. It's a piece of software that says, when the psyche is confronted with the temptation of immediate, effortless bliss, the executive function, Odysseus, must employ force. It must violently override the sensory-driven parts of the self in order to maintain the overall trajectory towards psychic integration, or home.
Wow. Okay, so it's literally a user's manual for the brain. It's saying, warning, system error detected. If input equals oblivious bliss, then execute executive override protocol.
Exactly. And it does all of that complex psychological work without a single abstract word like executive function or delayed gratification. It encodes the dynamic into a memorable, transmissible narrative packet that is a technology. It's software for the human animal to navigate the treacherous waters of its own consciousness.
It's like a zip file. The story is the compressed file. If you have the right software on your computer to unzip it, you get this huge, detailed manual on psychology and ethics.
That is a perfect analogy.
But if you don't have that software, if you're a modern reader like me, you just see the file icon. You just see the surface story called Guy Fights the Cyclops and Some Lazy Sailors.
And that is the tragedy that this research points to. We've lost the unzipping tool. We've lost the cognitive architecture that could read these texts structurally. So now we're stuck reading them literally, which is the least interesting way to read them.
We get stuck asking, but did a one-eyed giant really exist?
When the ancient mind was asking, okay, what part of my own internal geography is the Cyclops? What part of me is this brutish, single-minded, cannibalistic force that can't see with depth perception?
The sources bring up psychological dyads as another one of these encoded structures. This one really clicked for me. We see these character pairings everywhere in ancient literature. Gilgamesh and Enkidu, Achilles and Patroclus, Moses and Aaron.
The dyad is one of the most fundamental and persistent structures in this narrative technology. Let's take the oldest one we have, the Epic of Gilgamesh. You have Gilgamesh. He's two-thirds god. He's the king. He built the Great Walls of Uruk. He is the man of culture, structure, law, and civilization.
And then you have Enkidu,
who is his complete opposite. He's the wild man. He's created from clay. He's covered in hair. He lives with the animals in the wilderness. He is pure, untamed instinct, nature itself.
It's the classic buddy cop movie. You've got the by-the-book, straight-laced cop and his wild, loose-cannon partner.
And that's exactly how we read it today, as a story about two very different guys who become best friends. But in the holistic cognitive architecture, they're unmistakably two halves of a single divided psyche.
So they're not two characters. They're one person's internal conflict, just externalized onto the page.
Precisely. Gilgamesh is the ego, the intellect, the civilizing principle. Enkidu is the id, the body, the instinctual self. The first part of the story isn't about two guys having a wrestling match. It's a simulation of the process of psychic integration.
The ego has to confront and wrestle with its own instinctual nature.
It has to. The king, the intellect, cannot achieve true wisdom or maturity until he grapples with and then ultimately befriends and embraces the wild man, the instinct. The story is a map for that process.
Which explains why, later in the story, when Enkidu dies, Gilgamesh he completely falls apart.
He unravels, he weeps for days, he refuses to bury the body, he wanders the wilderness wearing animal skins. Because it's not just that his friend died. From a structural perspective, it's a psychic severance.
He's lost a part of himself.
He's lost his connection to the vital, instinctual, natural world. And the story is a profound warning. It's teaching you that if you try to live purely as the city builder, as the ego, and you suppress or lose your connection to the wild man, you will be plunged into a terrifying despair that no amount of civilized achievement can cure. You'll be terrified of death.
Okay, that makes so much sense. But I do want to push back on one thing. If these myths were, as the source says, publicly intelligible code, why the code?
Hmm.
Why not just write a book called, A Guide to Integrating Your Ego and Instinct? Why wrap it all up in a story about a hairy guy and a king fighting a bull?
Because abstract concepts don't stick. Narrative is the native format of the human brain. It's how we're wired to process complex information about the world.
So it's a data storage issue.
It's a storage and transmission issue.
Well.
If I give you a list of 10 psychological principles, you'll forget most of them by lunchtime. But if I tell you the story of Gilgamesh, you will remember the pattern for the rest of your life. The story sinks in.
And it's not just about memory, is it?
No, and this is maybe the most important point. The story allows for participation. You don't just observe the story of Gilgamesh. You can inhabit it. You can see your own pride in him, your own wildness in Enkidu. You can't inhabit a bullet point list of rules.
That distinction right there, participation versus observation, that seems to be the hinge that this whole argument turns on.
It is.
And that brings us perfectly to the next section, which is about the actual environment these stories lived in, the holistic landscape, as the outline puts it.
Right. And to understand this, we first have to just completely dismantle what the sources call the myth of isolation.
Okay, what's that?
We tend to project our modern world with its hard religious boundaries back onto the ancient past. Today, if you identify as a Christian, you are, by definition, not a Muslim. If you're a devout Hindu, you're not a devout atheist.
We have very clear, rigid, mutually exclusive boxes.
We have fortresses with high walls, and we assume the ancient world was just an earlier version of that, a bunch of different religious fortresses all fighting each other.
But the research we're looking at says that's just completely false. It describes the ancient world as being surprisingly interconnected.
It was.
Now, hold on a second. Was it really? I mean, when I think of the ancient world, I think of conquest. The Assyrians weren't exactly known for their gentle, multicultural inclusivity. They were famous for flaying their enemies alive. The Romans conquered everybody they could. How can we call that world holistic?
That's a crucial distinction we have to make. Holistic, in this cognitive sense, does not mean peaceful. It's not a moral judgment.
Okay.
It doesn't mean everyone held hands and sang songs. It means that the systems of meaning themselves were permeable. They were translatable. The software was, in a sense, open source.
What did that look like in practice?
Well, when the Romans conquered a new territory, say in Gaul, they didn't march in and say, your gods are false demons and you must stop worshiping them immediately.
I didn't.
No. They'd look at the local pantheon and say, okay, so you have a powerful sky god who controls the weather and throws lightning bolts. Interesting. We call him Jupiter. You call him Tyrannus. We're obviously talking about the same underlying cosmic force here.
This is the Interpretatio Romana, the Roman interpretation, or the Greek version.
Exactly. It's a process of syncretism. They didn't delete the local data. They absorbed it, reinterpreted it, and re-encoded it into their own system. They fundamentally lacked the modern concept of exclusive truth.
They didn't think, if my god Jupiter is real, then your god Tyrannus must be fake.
The thought would have been nonsensical to them. It would be like saying, the word water is true, so the word aqua must be false. They thought, the divine is a vast, multifaceted reality. We have this one map of it, you have this other map. Let's see where they overlap.
So the wars and the conquests were about concrete things. They were about resources, territory, political power, personal honor.
Yes. They were rarely, if ever, about dogma.
You didn't slaughter the people in the next valley because they had the wrong theology.
Right. Precisely. You slaughtered them because they had the fertile land that you wanted for your crops. The very idea of theological policing, of killing another human being because they define the nature of the divine differently than you do, that's a surprisingly recent and very specific invention in human history.
The visual that the source material gives, which I found really helpful, is to think of it not as competing fortresses, but as an overlapping network.
That's the perfect image. Think of it like a linguistic map. You have French spoken here and English spoken right next to it, and German over there. They use different words, different grammar, but they're all pointing to the same underlying reality. A table is a table is a tish.
In the holistic world, the gods were like words in different languages, all referring to the same fundamental cosmic powers or psychological principles.
Yes. There was a diversity of expression, but a unity of underlying structure. Meaning was relational. The systems were in constant conversation with each other through trade, migration, conquest, and translation.
So, what broke? Because we are very clearly not living in that networked world anymore. If you go online today and even gently suggest that all religions are just different words for the same thing.
You will get absolutely savage.
You will be attacked from every single fortress simultaneously. So what happened? How did we move from the network to the fortress?
This is what the sources call the Great Shift. And the villain of the story, if you want to call it that, is a process named dualistic institutionalization.
Okay, that's a mouthful. Let's break that down. What does that mean, and when did this shift happen? Are we talking about the Enlightenment, the Reformation?
Much, much earlier. The sources trace the beginning of this shift to the period of massive imperial consolidation. Specifically, you can see it accelerating in the late Roman Empire, and then it really crystallizes with the rise of what we call creedal monotheism.
So when empires get really, really big,
When they become vast, multicultural, bureaucratic machines. Because in that kind of system, ambiguity is a problem, local variation is a threat, because you need a single, unified, standardized identity to hold the entire state together across vast distances. If everyone is practicing their own local, syncretic, remixed version of religion, how do you ensure their ultimate loyalty is to the central authority in Rome or Constantinople and not to their local traditions?
you need a standard. You need to be able to clearly define who is in the group and who is out.
You need a bright line. And this is where you start to see the rise of formal doctrine and centralized authority. This is where you get the great ecumenical councils.
Like the Council of Nicaea in 325 AD.
That is the textbook historical example. You have a gathering of bishops overseen by the emperor himself, and their entire job is to sit in a room and vote on the precise metaphysical definition of the nature of Christ.
And once that vote is taken,
That definition becomes law. It becomes the creed. And if you disagree with that precise formulation of words, you aren't just a person with a different perspective anymore.
you're a heretic.
You are a heretic. You are an enemy of the established truth, and therefore, by extension, you are an enemy of the imperial structure that upholds that truth.
The sources call this a process of interpretive contraction. That's a great phrase.
It is. The field of possible meaning begins to narrow dramatically. We went from a world where the story was a tool for internal psychological exploration
For metabolizing structural insight.
to a world where the story becomes a legal definition used for external social control. The goal is no longer integration. The goal is capturing definitional authority.
Okay, can you give me a concrete example of this shift? How does it actually change the way an average person thinks or experiences the world?
Let's take a foundational concept like the Word of God.
Okay.
In a holistic, more ancient framework, the word, the logos in Greek, might be understood as the underlying ordering principle of the entire cosmos. It's dynamic, it's alive, it's something you perceive in the patterns of nature, in reason, in your own soul. It's everywhere.
It's a process.
It's a living process. But in the dualistic institutional framework, what does the Word of God become?
It becomes a book, a specific set of sentences written down on paper.
It becomes a static object. It becomes a text. And once the truth is a text, everything changes.
How so?
Well, if the Word is a book, then I can possess it. I can own it, I can hold it in my hands, I can hit you over the head with it, literally or metaphorically. I can create a test to see if you've read it and if you agree with my interpretation of it.
It transforms from a participatory mystery into a possessible fact.
That is the perfect summary of the entire shift. And the moment you start treating truth as an object that you possess, you automatically enter a dualistic zero-sum game.
What do you mean by zero sum?
I mean that if I have the one true object, the true book, the true creed, and you come along with a different one, then you are a threat. You're either trying to steal my property or you are trying to devalue my currency by introducing a counterfeit.
So only one of us can be right.
Only one. And that explains the intense defensive posture that defines so much of modern belief. If truth is a vast landscape, we can both explore it from different paths. But if truth is a single small object, then only one of us can hold it at a time.
And this leads us to what is, for me, one of the most surprising parts of the research. It's this section on the paradox of literacy.
Yes. This part really challenges our modern assumptions. As an academic, my whole life is based on the idea that books are good, that more writing and more reading equals more progress.
Of course, we use literacy rates as a primary metric for how advanced a civilization is.
We do. But the sources we're looking at here, and they reference ancient critiques of writing, like Plato's dialogue, the Phaedrus, they suggest that the explosion of written texts might not have been a sign of progress. It might have been a compensation for cognitive degradation.
Wait, hold on. Writing is a crutch. That's a huge claim.
That's a massive claim, but it's not a new one. Socrates himself, through Plato, famously warned that the invention of writing would destroy human memory. He said it would create a false sense of wisdom.
I think I remember this. He says something like, "They will hear many things without being properly taught, and will appear to be all-knowing when they are, for the most part, quite ignorant."
Ouch. Yeah. It's almost like he predicted the internet comments section.
He really did.
But this working hypothesis from the sources goes even deeper than just memory. It argues that in the older oral architecture, the coherence of the culture, its laws, its history, its wisdom, wasn't stored on an external medium like papyrus.
It was stored in people.
It was stored in the ritual body of the community. It was embodied knowledge. You learned the great myths, the great epics, by hearing them performed, by chanting them, by feeling the rhythms in your bones. The knowledge was alive inside you.
You couldn't just skim the Iliad for the good parts. You had to inhabit it.
You had to perform it mentally and often physically. And there's some fascinating archaeological evidence that supports this idea. It's what some call the list theory of early writing.
Okay.
The very earliest examples of writing that we found are not epic poems or deep philosophy or sacred texts.
They're accounting ledgers.
They're boring stuff. They're lists of grain sacks, inventories of sheep, records of debts, bureaucratic paperwork.
So why is that? Why write down the boring stuff first?
Because nobody needed to write down the myths. The myths were alive and well in the oral symbolic architecture of the people. You don't need to write down the thing that everyone knows, breathes, and lives every single day. You only need to write down the things that are dead and disconnected, like how many jars of olive oil you owe to the temple.
So the argument is, as we started to lose the collective mental ability to hold these huge, complex, recursive structures in our shared consciousness, as that oral architecture began to decay.
We had to write them down to save them from being lost forever.
So scripture is like a lifeboat. It's a preservation technology for a culture that's forgetting how to swim.
That's the argument. We wrote it all down, not because we were getting smarter, but because we were, in a sense, getting dumber. We were losing the skill of internal integration.
And once it's written down, it becomes fixed. It's static. It becomes a text with a capital T.
And then what do you need?
You need a class of experts. You need priests, scribes, lawyers, academics, people who can read and interpret the official text for everyone else.
It inevitably creates a hierarchy of knowledge. In the oral community, everyone who participates in the ritual hears the story. The technology is democratized. But in the literate empire, only the trained specialist can properly read and interpret the sacred book.
The institution captures the right to interpretation.
It does. The message becomes, don't trust your own participatory experience of the story. Don't trust your intuition. Wait for our official commentary. We will tell you what it really means.
And this connects so perfectly to the final and, I think, most powerful section of our dive today, the trap of belief and identity. Because if I can no longer trust my own internal experience of the technology, all I have left is to believe what the experts tell me.
And this is the real sting in the tail of this entire line of research. We in the modern world tend to think that belief is the absolute foundation of religion.
Of course.
Yeah.
That's the definition. You're a Christian because you believe certain things about Jesus. You're a Muslim because you believe the Quran is the word of God.
But the source material makes this really provocative statement. It says, belief is not the origin of religion, but the byproduct of interpretive contraction.
Okay, you have to unpack that. Because on the surface, that sounds completely backwards.
Think of it this way. In that older, holistic state, you don't believe in the sun, you experience the sun. It warms you, it gives life to the crops. It's a direct participatory reality. You don't believe in the ritual, you perform the ritual, and it has an effect on you and your community.
Yeah.
Belief is what is left over when that direct participatory experience is gone. You only have to believe in something when you're fundamentally separated from it. Belief is the emergency measure the mind takes when it has lost direct contact.
So belief is a bridge that we desperately build across a chasm that didn't used to be there. We build it because we've lost the original landmass that connected the two sides.
It's the fossil of a dead insight. And because it's just a fossil, because it's brittle and abstract and disconnected from lived reality, we become pathologically obsessed with defending it.
And this is where identity comes in. This is how we build our modern sense of self.
Yes. This is identity formation in the dualistic world. When you lose that deep relational depth, that felt sense that you are an integrated part of your community, the natural world, the cosmos, you feel small, you feel fragile and isolated.
So you need something to hold on to.
You grasp onto a doctrine, a set of beliefs. You say, I am a person who believes X. That statement becomes your shell. It becomes your identity.
And if someone comes along and challenges that belief, they're not just questioning an idea.
They are threatening your very existence. If they crack that shell, you feel like you will disintegrate. And that is why arguments about religion and politics are so uniquely vicious and personal.
We're not actually arguing about facts on a page. We're fighting for our psychological survival.
Exactly. We've taken these incredible narrative technologies that were designed to model interior psychological processes and help us integrate ourselves, and we've turned them inside out. We've reified them as external truths that must be defended at all costs.
So the focus shifts entirely, from integration to defense.
From how can I use this story to understand myself, to how can I prove that my story is right and your story is wrong?
This completely recontextualizes the ancient concept of idolatry. I mean, I was always taught that idolatry was just, don't bow down to a golden calf statue.
That's the literal surface reading.
No.
But structurally, in this framework, what is the core sin of idolatry?
Not sure.
It's what this source is called premature stabilization of symbolic meaning. It's taking a dynamic, fluid, living mystery and trying to freeze it into a static, finite object.
So making a golden calf is an idol, because you're saying this ineffable, mysterious divine force can be fully captured in this one specific physical thing that I made.
Precisely. You're confusing the map with the territory. You're worshiping your own limited concept, your own definition, instead of the boundless reality it's supposed to point to.
Okay, but if we follow that logic, that means that religious fundamentalism is a form of idolatry.
According to this framework, it is the ultimate form of idolatry. If you say, I have captured God completely inside this one book. I know exactly what God thinks, who God loves, who God hates, and what God wants for all time. You have created a textual idol.
You've taken the infinite and you've trapped it in the finite.
You've made a golden calf out of words. You're no longer worshiping the living reality. You're worshiping your own certainty, your own definition.
That's deeply uncomfortable thought. It suggests that the very people who are often the loudest about being true believers might actually be the ones who are furthest from the original function of the technology.
The louder the claim to certainty, the deeper the interpretive contraction. Certainty is the enemy of the recursive process. If you are absolutely certain, you stop searching, you stop integrating, the software shuts down.
Wow. This has been a massive, massive download of information. I feel like we've traveled from Odysseus' ship to the walls of Uruk to the Council of Nicaea and ended up talking about the invention of belief as a kind of psychological defense mechanism.
It's a lot to take in, I know.
It is. But I want to try and land this plane in our world, in the present day, because none of us are ancient Sumerians. We're modern people with jobs and mortgages and smartphones and a lot of anxiety. Why does any of this matter to us right here, right now?
It matters because we're all still running on that dualistic operating system. In fact, you could argue that our modern digital world has supercharged it.
How so?
Now, just look at our public discourse. Look at politics. It is pure, unadulterated dualism. My side is the side of light and truth. Your side is the side of darkness and lies. My candidates are saviors. Your candidates are demons.
We treat our political parties like rival churches with their own dogmas and heresies.
We absolutely do. We are constantly searching for rigid, simple, binary categories in a world that is messy, fluid, and profoundly complex. And because our mental map, our ideology, doesn't even come close to matching the actual territory of reality, we get constantly frustrated. We get angry. We retreat into our echo chambers.
We doom scroll.
We doom scroll. We are trying to navigate a quantum reality using faulty binary code, and we can't figure out why the system keeps crashing.
So what's the alternative? We can't just, snap our fingers and go back to being Bronze Age peasants living in an oral culture.
No, of course not. We can't go backward. The arrow of time only moves in one direction. But we can learn to recognize the nature of the technology. We can become conscious of the operating system we're running.
So we can start to read our own stories differently.
We can stop reading our sacred texts, our national myths, even the story of our own lives, as if they are static facts that need to be defended. We can start learning to read them as what they were always meant to be, as recursive maps for internal exploration.
So when I feel that hot defensive anger rising in me during an argument, that desperate need to prove that I am right,
You should pause.
I should pause and ask a different question.
You should ask, what is the psychological dyad at play here? What internal tension inside of me am I trying to silence by shouting at this other person? That is the Gilgamesh move. That is the beginning of the reintegration of the lost Enkidu within.
The sources and our whole discussion, they leave us with one final, very unsettling thought. And I want to leave our listener to chew on this one.
Go for it.
If the central claim is true, if claiming exclusive possession of truth is evidence of interpretive narrowing, if being absolutely right is actually a symptom of having a small, contracted consciousness, then what does that say about our entire modern culture of debate and argument?
It suggests that our whole intellectual economy, what we proudly call the marketplace of ideas, might just be a marketplace of idols. We are just endlessly trading and fighting over these dead, hardened shells of old insights and calling it wisdom.
And maybe the wisest thing any of us can do is to stop trying so hard to win the argument.
And start trying to understand the code.
Stop defending the fortress. Go back out and explore the territory.
Well said.
Thank you so much for taking this dive with us.
Yeah.
This was a heavy one, but I feel like it was a really necessary one.
My pleasure. It was a fascinating topic.
And to everyone listening, please don't just believe us. That would be completely missing the point, wouldn't it? Go and check the code for yourself. We'll see you next time on The Deep Dive.